Is this the perfect solution to your style? Hey guys, my name is Ivir and today is all about mixing designer with vintage. I'll be going through why I think is the superior solution for any wardrobe and style, and then I'll give you some styling tips, and in the end I'll give examples of my outfits mixing designer with vintage. But as always, before we get into it, I would ask you to consider subscribing and liking the video, as it really helps out the channel. We're trying to build something special here, so we'd love it if you join us on this journey. But anyways, let's get into it. First off, why? Why is mixing designer with vintage the way to go? Well, here you have my main points. More personality. It's no secret that vintage, and especially high quality vintage, carries a lot more personality than, let's say, anything from H&M all the way up to high-end designer. That's just the way it is. It's more lived in. It's just lived the life. But what I do is I buy high quality, old, very often distressed vintage, and it just has so much more personality. Second off is the obvious why, and that is sustainability. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, it's not my main reason why I wear designer and vintage. Obviously, with high-end designer, it's usually made from more high-end fabrics, and the people who work at the factories are usually better paid and have better lives in general than, let's say, if you buy something from Shein or Temu. That's most likely children, which is not good. But yeah, let's take Rick Owens for an example. He has his own factory with his own workers that he treats really well and they get well paid. I love that stuff. And then with vintage, it's obviously sustainable. The clothing already exists, which means there's no carbon footprint, if you will, like at all. So yeah, buy high-end and vintage, and your conscience should be much cleaner than most other people's. That sounds a bit bad, but it just is. The third point is that it's much less trend-based and more original. What I mean about that is that if you buy vintage, it's obviously old clothing, so they're not like specifically in trend. Most of it is very timeless, and when you mix that timelessness with like high-end designer pieces, obviously some high-end designers are very on trend. But let's say in my case, I usually buy Rick Owens, and that's very much its own universe. You know what I mean? But mixing that very special universe that people associate with those fashion week photos and those guys, you know, and mixing that with something older and more like shredded and distressed and just lived in, I think that just carries such an originality. That's why you don't see a lot of people who dress like me, because I've mixed two different worlds that I've dipped like not just my toe, but like my whole leg into, you know? I used to dress in only vintage, and I had a period where I only wore Rick, but like morphing those two together, so cool. The fourth reason why is that it's not too rugged and it's not too perfect, you know what I mean? I'm gonna touch on this later on, but like, you don't go full homeless and you don't go full designer. You're never gonna look too rugged or too perfect. You end up in this like sweet spot where you don't look too rugged and you don't look too perfect. You get me? I think you do. The fifth one's a fun one, and that is that you can always go shopping. Let's say you go to a little town in Italy. There's probably an antique store. There's probably a vintage store, like just random secondhand clothing from the people in the village, you know? You can shop there. If you go to Paris, London, New York, you can obviously shop there, both vintage and designer. But you can always there's always stuff to find, like artifacts. It doesn't have to be clothing. For example, this marble jewelry box that I have, I bought this in a small town in Italy, hence my point. Same with this pin. So mixing your home and space with high-end designer stuff and more personality-based like vintage and antique stuff, it's a lot of fun. You feel like you're like building your own little world, kind of. That sounded a bit corny, didn't it? But you know what I mean. Second to last point is that vintage helps age the designer. Probably doesn't make sense at first, but hear me out. Let's say you wear a very shredded old t-shirt with like some Rick Owens pants that are brand new. They're gonna influence each other, right? Because if you wore a shredded t-shirt with a shredded pair of jeans, that's gonna look all the way rugged, right? Like my last point. And if you wear full designer, it's gonna look way too perfect and look like you took it right off the rack and went into the streets. And I don't like the box fresh look on anything, which is why I wear my designer stuff a ton, just to like mess it up a bit. You know what I mean? Like heel bites, scratches, stains. I don't care about that. It's a part of the life cycle of a piece of clothing, right? But yeah, they balance each other out. So in my example, I think the pants would just look a bit more lived in if you wear them with a shredded t-shirt or like a very visibly old jacket. And yeah, that balance is just like the perfect sweet spot. And the seventh and last point is that the silhouette of vintage tops or jackets just seem to work so well with designer pants and boots, of course. But my point is like, I wear a lot of very wide designer trousers, and most of the stuff that's made these days is just too long or like not long enough, but like that weird mid-length. But vintage stuff, usually pants were just higher waisted back in the day, so jackets and tops are just shorter. That's just the way it is. So those jackets and tops, both shirts and t-shirts, they just work so well with both like high-waisted designer trousers, just loose fit designer trousers, flared, anything really. It just for some reason seems to fit perfectly together. Now that you know the why, let's get to the how. Here are my main styling tips or rules to mix designer with vintage. First point is opt for designer trousers and then work around that. It's not a must, but usually when I build an outfit, I start with pants anyway, and I like that to be the centerpiece of the outfit. So usually I go with something very fashiony, like super wide trousers, extremely flared. And I just think that vintage trousers are usually a bit more conform, a bit stricter, more old school. And I think the combination of the designer trousers with the other parts that are vintage builds a lot of character. I think it looks like you still are into fashion and not just menswear in general. And it looks like you know what you're doing, but you're not overdoing it. Make sense? Second point is that do not go full homeless. You don't want to be the guy that everyone thinks is homeless when you're just wearing like special vintage pieces. There are a select few people that can rock this, of course. I'm not going to say there are no people, but it's not me. And it's probably not you either. That segues perfectly into the third point, and that is don't look too perfect either. See, vintage clothing can still look perfect if it's like dead stock, you know what I mean? But this doesn't have any personality. That's why I like to wear my vintage pieces. I like to get a heel bite, I like to get stains, I like to get like knee stretches and everything. Just wear your clothing, don't be afraid to ruin it a bit. It's just gonna add to the look. And the fourth point is definitely in the same area, and that is just live in your designer clothing. The more you mess it up, the better in my opinion. I like to just wear my clothing a ton. That's why you see like some of my Rick Owens pants, some of my Acne pants, they almost look vintage at this point, especially like my black wrap trousers. I'm actually wearing them currently, but it's gonna add so much more character and personality to your outfits and your style in general, and that just looks so much cooler. Fifth point is a fun one, and that is that vintage tees are always sick, and the older the better. If I find like shredded t-shirts from the 40s or 50s that I can just wear over any of my like Rick Owens pants, I'm good to go. Especially now that it's summer, it's hot outside, I just want to wear a t-shirt, but that t-shirt needs to be sick. And very often, the sickest t-shirts are vintage. The sixth point is that try to build a full designer outfit and then add a vintage jacket or shirt on top. I just like the way a vintage, especially jacket, really tones down a full designer look. It just adds a bit of that like, you know what you're doing, but you're not overdoing it. And it's such a cool juxtaposition between like the perfect designer stuff and the very ruined vintage, almost antique stuff. That's why a lot of military vintage is like perfect for this, especially with Rick stuff. He's obviously very inspired by old military stuff anyways, so that mix is perfect. Seventh point is really good, and that is that you should consider chunky old vintage boots. For example, these bunny boots, but there are also like tons of old military boots, especially winter or like heavy weather boots, heavy duty boots usually does the trick. Like there are tons of vintage chunky boots that are from the military. It doesn't have to be the US, doesn't have to be the UK, it can be from wherever really. Like the bunny boots, for example. These are like one of my favorite pair of boots. And I have a lot of footwear that were way more expensive than them, but they're just perfect. The eighth and final style tip for mixing designer with vintage is that you should look for antique or vintage jewelry. Like this, for example, right? Or my coin bracelet. They're just things that carry a lot of personality. This watch, for example, is from the 30s. This is my dad's old confirmation ring. My mom's old ring, and my mom's old ring again. And I have mixed that with some silver from my friend's brand, Demba Oslo. But yeah, I just think that vintage jewelry just looks so much more interesting. It looks like you've lived a 400-year life, you know what I mean? It's a very overused word, but you will look so eclectic. And I think there are very few things that are cooler than that these days. And if you mix that look with like, let's say Rick Owens, Yohji Yamamoto, some Balenciaga stuff, Gucci for that matter, it just is a perfect match, in my opinion. I think it actually would look sick with like the newer Saint Laurent stuff as well, especially like the newer collections. And yeah, it just works with a lot of newer designer stuff. Anyways, that was the how. Now let's get into some actual examples. I'll be showing you and going through a lot of different outfits containing vintage and designer, and it's probably what you came here for, so let's get into it. For outfit number 1, we have what resembles my uniform the most out of the whole bunch. So we have basically a full Rick Owens look, but with the vintage jacket. This jacket pretty much resembles some of Rick Owens' jackets anyways, but I love it for that. The leather on it, I believe, is from the inside of a cow's stomach, which is very strange, but it's sick. And I chose this outfit mainly to show you that designer trousers are more special, so combining them with a vintage jacket like this is just really cool. But yeah, the silhouette is the main thing here. It's very cinched in the waist, very wide in both the upper body and the lower body, which I think works wonders. And yeah, next one. For outfit number 2, we have more of a tonal look, but still very silhouette heavy. And I think it really shows off how the vintage, especially bomber jackets, just work wonders with designer items. It features an M4A1 bomber jacket that is really short in the body, but wide, which I think works wonder with the wideness of the trousers, but the slimness of the tank. And then we also have vintage boots on. They're the bunny boots you just saw, Acne trousers, Rick tank, and yeah. I really like this look. For outfit number 3, we probably have the best balance between designer and vintage, even though there's only one vintage piece, which is the jacket. It's a 50s varsity jacket. The rest is designer, but these Acne trousers, I've had them since 2019, and I've worn them countless times, so they're starting to look vintage. They're pretty much just shredded at this point. The boots are from The Last Conspiracy, the tank top is Rick Owens, and yeah, I think it's a very balanced, all-rounded look. Which goes to show you that wear your clothing. Trust me, things that are made from high quality will age well. That's just the way it is. So if you buy designer pieces, don't be afraid to wear them, okay? For outfit number 4, we have the biggest rock star look out of the bunch, in my opinion. We have the flared Rick Owens Boland's banana cuts, the Cyclops boots, a 50s very sun-faded pocket tee with tons of holes, and the M4A1 bomber. So it's pretty much like half and half. The bottom half is designer, the top half is vintage. But I think it works wonders. If I kept the shredded and distressed nature of the top half on the bottom half, I would pretty much just look homeless at this point. But because I didn't, and I wore very much high-end designer stuff on the bottom half, it balances out. I think it very much does. And these pants are getting more and more faded by the day, so I think it just works better and better. I wore this outfit when the pants were new. Didn't work as well as it does now. And yeah, which just again goes to show you that the more you wear your stuff, the cooler it gets. I also think the silhouette is pretty sick here with the cropped bomber and then the longer t-shirt with the slimmer thighs and then the huge flare. Sick silhouette. For outfit number 5, we have the first vintage pants into the mix. These are an old pair of navy bell bottoms paired with the vintage leather shirt that I swapped the buttons on. Love this shirt now. And then a Rick Owens basic rib tank, of course, and the Rick Owens Cyclops boots. This outfit too is pretty rock starry, if I have to say so myself, but I just love the way the shirt interacts with the pants and then out towards the huge flare. I think it's cool, and it's also a great way to mix designer and vintage in a bit of a different way. And yeah, next outfit. The 6th and second to last outfit is pretty much the same as outfit number 2, but I swapped out the bomber jacket for the shearling vest. I think it's a great silhouette. I love the colors together. I think the shearling goes really well with the pants. And yeah, so the vest is vintage and the boots. The pants are, like I said, Acne Studios, and the tank top is, of course, Rick Owens. And yeah, love this outfit. Not too much more to say, I'm just trying to prove my point of like the way to build it up here. Try something like this for yourself. You can swap out this vest, which is kind of special, with just a normal waistcoat that is vintage, a leather one maybe, and you look sick. The last outfit is more of a fall winter one, but it is one of my favorite ones. It just goes to show you that find yourself a huge vintage overcoat and throw it over those huge designer trousers, and you got yourself a look. I did pair this with a slimmer Rick Owens basic rib tank to get some silhouette into it, if you will, or some body shape. And the bunny boots instead of the Cyclops boots to have more vintage than I could have. Because this vintage jacket is in fact Hugo Boss, so it is vintage, but it's also designer. You know what I mean? But I love this look. I love the way the coat interacts with the pants. And it just had to be the last outfit, as it is 50% vintage and 50% designer. Anyways, that was all we had for today. I hope you learned something or maybe even got some inspiration. But remember to like the video and subscribe if you want to see more, because we have a lot of stuff in the works. Anyways, have a great rest of the day, and thanks for watching.